So the Fatherhood Institute did some research that suggests that 80% of working dads feels there is less support in the workplace for them than their mom counterparts. And I often wonder, why is this? Guilt, anxiety, overwhelm is on the rise with busy working men who are bringing home to work and work home. And often without a place to turn, it's inevitable that those feelings become internalized. Anxiety, guilt is the outcome. Male suicide is 3 times more prevalent than women. And again, I often wonder, why is this? So many things go unanswered and unspoken about. And those are the topics we're going to discuss in this episode of the Dads in Business podcast. Our guest today has lived experience around these points, and it's something we are going to be touching on. And I felt it relevant to just signpost some resources for anyone affected by the topics that we discuss. Our guest today suggested that you visit hubofhope.co.uk for support on these topics, but it's also obviously his area of specialism. So something we're going to talk about through those experiences, his experiences, and how he's helping workplaces build wellbeing strategies to help overcome that and create better spaces and workplaces for men and dads. Paul McGregor, good morning to you. How are you? Give us an introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And how do you help people?
I'll give you the short version because I'm sure we'll dive into some longer stuff later. But yes, I'm Paul. I'm a dad of 3, which is relevant to the podcast. I've got 3 boys, and I'm also the founder of everymindatwork.com. And as you kind of highlighted, we specialize in providing workplace wellbeing support to organizations. Our partners range from the likes of Wagamama and Co-op and Superdry to construction companies and small tech companies and multiple more. So our focus is to reinvent the way organizations approach mental health. I definitely believe that it's broken, and we're doing our best to try and change that. And yeah, looking forward to diving into my personal experiences, which kind of led me to that position that I'm in here today.
Brilliant. It's great to have you here. And before we dive into that, I've got 3 boys too. How old are your boys?
My boys are spread out. So you'll never believe this. I've got a 13-year-old called Freddie, and he's my stepson, but I met Freddie, he came into my life when he was 18 months old. So yeah, calls me dad. Got a good relationship with his dad as well. His stepmom, co-parenting in 2022, right? And then 2023. And then Teddy. So I've got Freddie, I've got Teddy. Teddy is 6. And believe it or not, we have a 9-month-old called Ralphie. So 3 boys all spread out. One minute you're feeding the bottle to a baby, the next minute you're playing Minecraft with the 6-year-old, the next minute you're talking about, can I watch In-Betweeners, Dad, to the 13-year-old. So lots going on.
Yeah, it keeps you busy, right? Brilliant. And I just want to touch on the work that you do, and I guess a bit of your backstory about why it is. Why do you do what you do? Why have you set up Everymind at Work? I think it'd help the listeners understand how you got here, because I think it's a fascinating backstory. And if you don't mind sharing some of that, that'd be wonderful to hear.
Yeah, of course. So starting Everymind comes from my own personal experience. So we're an organization. One of our core values is to be personal. The other one is to be relatable. And what we mean by that is to really lean in on personal experiences. So in other words, we believe that showing statistics and turning up with some slides doesn't have the same impact as being human and talking personally about your own experiences. And my own experience was, sadly, I was never impacted by mental illness until I was 18. And my understanding of mental illness up until that point was very different to what it is now. I'm sure you can relate to that. I'm sure lots of other people listening can relate to that. Growing up, I was always told that, it was straitjackets, padded cells, and personalities that don't act like me, right? It was kind of my own exposure to it. It was the movies that I saw and the newspaper articles, and that was it. And sadly, 18, all of that changed for an experience I had with my dad. My dad was an engineer by trade. He was an incredible runner. He was someone who trained once, if not twice a day when it comes to running. He was someone who meditated back in 2007 before meditation was cool. Like, no one had a bad word to say about my dad. And what was hard was underneath all of that, it came to the fruition through what I would call a breakdown very quickly. He was obviously dealing with a mental illness in complete silence. And what I mean by a breakdown is his behaviors changed. He was now telling us that he was struggling. And in that moment, you do all that you can, and you take him to the doctors, and he was diagnosed with depression, signed off from work, and it's like, what happens now? And what followed was a 6-month period really of just ups and downs. We had an attempted suicide 6 days after that initial diagnosis, which was a massive shock. Then we had about 4 months of that where my dad spent in a mental health unit, a psychiatric ward, something that we never ever thought that we'd have to go and visit my dad in ever. And yeah, it was a really tough 6 months, but sadly, the reason why I started Everymind, the reason why I do this work is we did lose my dad, and we did lose my dad to suicide. And it was back in 2009. I was 18, nearly 19. My dad was 45 years old when he took his own life. And it's just a hard grief to deal with. And I just think I was never given the tools to deal with it either. I don't think, you know, in particular, we're taught how to manage stuff like that. And as a man, I was very much of the belief of just manning up and cracking on and getting on with it. It was the way of dealing with it. But yeah, I then dealt with my own challenges, depression, anxiety, and in a real crisis point myself, I was desperate for some help, and I was very, very fortunate to get help through therapy. And it's the reason why I sit here talking about this. I've been going to therapy for 11 years. I still go. I don't have any shame in saying that. And I just think it's so important to keep working on ourselves and be more open about experiences like this, because I think the more silence around them, the harder it is. So yeah, about 6-7 years ago, I started talking about my story when I felt comfortable to do so. That led me into workplaces, doing lunch and learns and talks. And what I come to realize was I'm only being invited on Mental Health Awareness Week or World Mental Health Day. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. It's not appropriate to just do it once a year. Yeah, tick box. So Everymind started. Yeah, Everymind was like, how do we create ongoing proactive support for businesses? And how do we really change the way that employees feel when they're at work, because we spend a third of our lives at work. So yeah, there's lots probably to unpack there, but we're very, very purpose driven, and it all really stems from that experience I had with my dad.
Well, I mean, thank you for sharing that. It's always nice to hear those experiences, and you're right, there's a certain element of, I hate the word, but authenticity that comes out when you've got those lived experiences. You couldn't speak so openly and honestly about it if it hadn't have happened. And you know, what a good thing you're doing by taking something so horrible and making it impact positively on other people's lives. So you know, kudos to you for that. I mean, I had a couple of questions around it while you were talking. Then you're right. There's a bit to unpack around that. You said that your dad, you know, he sounded like a athletic engineer mechanic type. It was, but he seemed to be suffering in silence. I mean, did you ever find out what he was suffering about? Did he make that aware?
No, there's a lot of like stuff that I've learned over the years since he's been gone, but the challenging part of that is I can never ask him those questions, and that I've had to learn that that's something that I've got to deal with, because when you lose someone to suicide, one of the hardest questions that you keep trying to answer is why. And what I come to learn is that you'll never know why. So you need to stop trying to answer that question. But with my dad, I think he was, you know, as you said, an engineer. He was also a qualified physiotherapist. So he had what you would call a side hustle nowadays, right? Where evenings and weekends, he was a physio. We used to have our spare room. He would be like, you know, practicing sports massage. And then he also had like a psychology A level. So he kind of like dived into so much stuff, my dad. But I don't know. What I would say is I've come to meet a lot of people that manage OCD. And when they talk about their experiences of OCD, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see that in my dad. Now, my understanding of OCD was massively different to what it is now. You know, I think it's one of the most misunderstood mental illnesses, in the way that we say we're a little bit OCD and we just see that as what it is. But when I hear people talk about the obsessive thoughts and the intrusive thoughts, and if I don't do this, this stuff is going to happen, or I'm going to do this. My dad was very much of that obsessive nature that I used to see as him being very determined, whereas actually now was that the OCD that he could have been dealing with. So I would definitely say there was lots of challenges my dad was experiencing, but yeah, we never really got the opportunity to ask him, because even through that 6 months period, we didn't really know what to say or really what to do. We kind of just hoped that the NHS and the mental health unit would get him back to a place where he would be good again. And just quickly as well, I think what's really hard with mental illness is, like, my dad would go from being in a mental health unit to being like, oh, I'm fine, I want to go back to work. Like, I'm so happy to be here. And it's so hard to read unless you're trained in that way to know what's the reality of how he's feeling in that moment. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't think we'll ever know.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about the OCD thing. You sort of, I see it a lot at school with the kids, for example. Everyone seems to get diagnosed so quickly with something. Everyone's got autism, or everyone's on the spectrum, or everyone's got OCD, or everyone's got anxiety. It seems like we're so quick to badge people up that the meaning of people who have actually got those things becomes a bit diluted in a way. And it's a bit of a risk, I think, that we almost, I don't know, create a sensationalizing thing about they've got something. Everyone has to have something. But the people that have actually got the thing get ignored. It could be the risk.
It's a really good point. I was talking about this the other day about, are we trying to medicalize human emotion too much? So in other words, if I go to the doctors and I'm dealing with grief, is there a high likelihood that I'm going to be given antidepressants and told that I'm dealing with depression? Whereas, is it that, or is it the fact that I'm dealing with a natural human emotion of grief and the difficulty that comes with that? The same as you say, stress. You know, we have to deal with stress. This isn't stuff that we can eradicate. This is natural human emotion. But actually, as you say, are we getting to a point where we're just trying to medicalize it too quickly to try and eradicate it? But actually, we need to talk more about how we can naturally manage human emotion a bit more. But yeah, it's a difficult one, because with more awareness comes more people talking, and then more people going to get that support. And then guess what? You know, that support isn't there. So it's almost that's where it's breaking.
Yeah. It's you go to doctors and they'll just throw tablets at you. You've got depression. You've got this. Like, well, maybe there's other routes to it. But you know, it's one for probably another topic than what we're chatting about here. But I think you said something else in your introduction when you first started dealing with what had happened, and you almost went through the phase of, I don't know if you were told it or if it's just you were telling yourself to man up, to get on with it, internalize it in a way. And yeah, there's some commonalities in our stories. My dad passed away when I was 20. It's a lot to take for a young man. I don't think I've ever properly addressed that myself. So I wholly understand why you chat to people about it even today. You don't just get over that sort of thing. I don't think it's something I've personally addressed properly anyway. But I can certainly resonate with what you're saying when people say, man up, just get on with it, brush it under the carpet. There's a risk that, or is there a risk that is what almost started things with your dad? He was almost told to be a man like this, do this. Is the stigma and stereotypes that we're telling ourselves creating a higher risk of suicide in men?
Yeah, 100%. My granddad was an incredible man. I love my granddad dearly. Like, he was such a resilient individual. And I've also had so many remarkable, funny moments with my granddad. He was a right character, right? But he was born in 1925. He went through World War II. You and I know how he dealt with mental health. It was very much like, it doesn't exist. Let's not talk about emotions. Let's not talk about feelings. Now, when my dad passed from suicide, and when he died from suicide, my granddad didn't cry at his funeral. Then my nan died a month later, and my granddad didn't cry at that funeral. And we were like waiting for my granddad to get this breaking point, because it was like, this is just too much for him, like to lose his only child, his son, to suicide, and then his wife of over 50 years to cancer in the April, and a month later. But he didn't. He never cried. He went straight back, got in his car and cracked on and kept going. And my granddad, you know, survived till he was 95. But the last 6 months of my granddad's life, when he was deteriorating physically, he was the most emotional man I've ever met.
Right.
Like, he cried so much. Like, you know, talk about the war 5-6 years before that, he would tell you stories. Talk about the war in that time. Don't talk about this. He would cry. It was like this trauma was flooding back. Now I think about my dad, and I think about, that was the man that he was role modeling, the man that he saw, you know, that I explained to you, not the man in the last 6 months, the man that I showed to you, that let's not talk about emotions. Let's man up. Let's get on with it. And my dad definitely role modeled that. So in the way that I say that my dad broke very quickly with his mental illness, and he broke down, and we then knew there was a problem, I'm sure my dad would say he was breaking for years, but as a man, he's never going to talk about it, right? Never going to talk about it, because the shame, the judgment, everything else. And then I think about how I dealt with my dad and the challenges I had. I was role modeling my dad and my granddad, right? Which was, I didn't cry much. If I did, it was like burying my head in a pillow, and I'm not going to let anyone hear me. And at the same time, it was like, I just need to let everyone know that I'm fine, because I don't want them to see what I'm seeing. I don't want them to to see that I might be struggling, because I would perceive that as weakness at that time. And of course I was wrong, but it's an interesting one, because obviously, same as you, Rob, you know, I've got 3 boys, and I'm constantly thinking about that. I'm like, how do I encourage them to talk about their mental health and their emotions and know that it's okay to do that as a man? But equally, and I'm sure you would agree with this, life is hard, and I want to make sure they're resilient, to know that they've got the tools and the ways to be able to deal with that. But one thing that's really interesting is, I always tell my kids, especially my eldest son, you know, don't worry about crying. Like, it's important to cry. And he's now at a point where he's struggling to cry. And I'm like, it's okay to cry. It's okay to cry. And I keep telling him that. And then I reflected on this recently, and I remembered I don't cry much still. So I can tell him as much as I possibly want, but he's role modeling my behaviors, which is I just don't cry still. I still struggle with that. So I think we've got a long way to go to change the perception of men talking about mental health. It's getting a lot better. You know, seeing stuff like Declan Rice, you know, West Ham's captain, talk about mental health. You know, that's going to be great for the kids to see their role models and their idols talk about it. But yeah, I think we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, I agree, and you're right. It's so challenging bringing up kids in this generation where they're so connected. They're so much more seemingly advanced, you know, in what they do in terms of tech and how they engage with stuff. That dealing with that appears to me that it's a wholly different way, an experience of when we were growing up to our kids growing up. My parents probably dealt with me differently to what I have to deal with my kids now, because the world they're grown up in is wholly different. But I guess the principles of resilience and, you know, identity and all that still stand true. And it's a real challenge to get that in, isn't it? The balance, if you like, is a real challenge. I was curious, Paul, about, was there a sort of a light bulb moment where you moved away from this man up mentality to learning to deal with it in a more proactive way? What had happened to you? Did you decide one day I'm going to wake up and not let it affect me? Because I guess I can look back now on my own experiences of my dad passing away, and I look back at it's almost like a fork in the road. It's like I can let this break me and ruin me, or I can try and set out to be everything that I know he would have wanted me to be. But I can't remember actively choosing that direction, but I look back now and know that that's what happened. I just wonder what your experience around that was that made you move from this man up thing to someone that could address it. What were the milestones that started to appear for you to overcome it and move forward?
I think it's a really good observation, and it's the same as yours. Your example there. I think people naturally assume that there's like this decision that you've made, but it wasn't a decision I made. It was more about, you know, I went to therapy when I was 21, and when I went to therapy the first time, I was low. I'd had suicidal thoughts. I'd had, you know, a doctor tell me that I'm dealing with depression and anxiety. I ran away from that diagnosis just because I was so fearful of like turning into my dad. Still is the biggest fear that I've got, I'll end up like my dad, right? So I run away from that diagnosis, but I was really low. And I was so fortunate that at that point, it was almost like last chance saloon, that this lady called Anne, this therapist, she was the person I felt comfortable to talk to, like 3 sessions in, you know, crying my eyes out to this complete stranger for the first time. But again, there was no like light bulb moment of like, now I've told this one person, I'm going to go and tell so many other people. And this is one thing that I don't think people understand. Maybe when they see me posting on social media, there was about, I'd say 6-7 years of me not still really talking to many people about it, but going through therapy and reading books and trying to understand myself a bit more. You know, I always say that I went to therapy, and it still took me 3 years to tell my best friend that I was going to therapy because of the shame and judgment that comes from something like that. So I think that amount of time that I was putting in to try and discover more about my dad and understand it and understand me, the first time that I then shared it was actually for a blog post, which I remained anonymous as well. So what then happened was, after that blog post, I started to see the comments in it, and the comments were really positive. And then it was like, okay, I might do a video. So I did a video and it was on YouTube. And again, it was about kind of my dad's story. And again, the kind of feedback and the people sort of saying how it helped them just encouraged me to do a bit more. But I think there was one moment that I would highlight. It was the first time that I ever did public speaking around my dad's story. And I kind of threw myself in the deep end. It was in a conference in America, in Atlanta. And it was from YouTubers that I knew. They were like based in, they were sort of focused on fashion and business. And I did a talk on depression in men. And I talked about my dad, and I talked about how as men, we need to talk more. And there was about 250 people there. And even though it was extremely terrifying to do, afterwards was the biggest encouragement that I had, in the fact that I had so many men come up to me afterwards and say, just because of your story, I'm going to feel comfortable to tell you mine. And just stories, share. And then that was a bit of a eureka moment of, wow, vulnerability is powerful. Like if you get someone to open up, especially as men, you feel more comfortable to open up. So it's definitely been a journey, but I've seen throughout the years of doing it that I think vulnerability isn't spoken about in a way of it being a strength, but it is, especially with men. The more men that talk, the more men that feel comfortable to talk as well.
No, it's I can connect with that. When we first did a project for an organization around their dad's community, the part of the dads in business ethos, or the reason for its being, is that I found working for myself, raising kids, bloody difficult. There was no sort of point of reference of how to be a dad. And I was like, what am I doing here? I'm winging it. It can't just be me. It feels like it's just me. And that, I don't know if you've heard feedback the same from that talk, for example, in the States, where there is a perception as men and dads where it is just me. I can't talk about that because it'll make me feel wrong. It'll make me feel like I've failed. But I'll tell you what, the amount of feedback that we get, and there was like a few hundred people on these calls, they were saying this has been like quite cathartic. This space is just what I need. It's like, oh my God, I thought it was just me. That, I guess, is what you've referenced to as vulnerability. They're creating this space. And I always say to people, like, when we speak to employers, I'll say, well, we'll just bundle it into a general well-being session. It's like, well, for me, I wouldn't engage that. I think men and dads need their own space, probably like women and women and mothers might need their own space too. I don't see that as a problem. I think if you try and bundle everything together, it can create more distance, would be my sort of thought on that. I wonder what your experiences were around that space, with men coming forward saying, thanks for sharing your story. I have this too. There's a real power in that space that's just for men.
100%. It's human, right? And it's about creating those safe spaces. Like in organizations, you might have heard this term before, like psychological safety. And psychological safety is really just creating those safer environments where people feel comfortable to talk openly about their mental health and what they're experiencing. And we're doing a lot of work at the moment with mental health first aiders and champions in organizations. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen with mental health first aid and champions implemented in business is there's not support wrapped around that network of people. And if you've got champions like you, as an example, you might be talking about your challenges of being a dad and working, that also takes its toll on you. Firstly, from you sharing that experience, but then secondly, people coming up to you and saying, hey, Rob, I'm going through this, I'm going through that. And then obviously then you're taking that home, and then it's kind of sometimes overwhelming. So we're doing a lot of work offering supervision and support for mental health first aiders and champions in business. But the reason why I say that is because what we've seen to be really effective is if those champions talk openly about their experiences, they naturally attract people of similar experiences as well. And then other safe spaces and groups start to form. The example that I use is I talk about suicide grief, right? It's such a unique form of grief that if someone starts to talk to me about their suicide grief and bereavement, we could probably agree on some things very quickly. The questions of why, the feeling like, did they actually love me? There's so much that you can resonate with other people. When it comes to, I don't know, something that I've not experienced before, that's harder for me to potentially give that advice on. So that is up to someone else who's got that other experience to be able to share that too. So as you say, I think those smaller environments, smaller settings is really important. There's a great charity called Andy's Man Club.
Mm.
Don't know if you've heard of Andy's Man Club, started by a friend of mine, Luke. And, you know, they're very strict on, you know, this is a group for men. It's a group for men. And it works so well because you have men in a room and like you have one person leading it vulnerably. And then it's this safe space where more and more people feel they can share. So yeah, I'd 100% agree with you. Those smaller groups and smaller networks of safe spaces is something that we need in communities, society, and in workplaces as well.
It seems that it's driven currently from almost like a cry for help. You know, your project stemmed from a lived experience. My Dads in Business project comes because it was like something I was struggling with, and it's like, well, where's the help for me? There isn't any. I'll create it. And you said in your introduction that you feel that mental health as a concept for employers might be a bit broken. And I've just scrolled down here. What do you mean by that? And how does Everymind aim to fix it? So what do you mean by mental health in the workplace is broken? And what are you trying to do to change that?
Yeah, so the key concept in regards to why mental health in the workplace is broken is, how do I explain this in the best way? Mental health in the workplace is broken because it's reactive. And what I mean by it's reactive is organizations for a very long time have implemented initiatives when it comes to mental health and well-being almost sit within that reactive stage. So if you're struggling, call this number. You know, if you're dealing with a challenge, call this number. And now, in other words, what we're saying is, let's wait until our employees are at a crisis point or at rock bottom before we give them that support. So again, it comes back to when I was doing talks on World Mental Health Day, Mental Health Awareness Week. It was like, okay, organizations are saying, tick, we've done something this year. That's fine. We've got our employee assistance program. We've got that counseling service. We'll just direct people there throughout the rest of the year. So our approach is to flip that and look at the proactive way of approaching mental health. So in other words, looking at providing support for organizations and their employees in regards to the right training, the right resources, the right education, proactive tools, but then also looking at how do you tackle stigma and psychological safety in an organization? Because the reality of it is you can go and train your managers, but if someone in their team doesn't feel comfortable talking to their manager, that training is a complete waste of time, right? So again, how do you create that culture, change the stigma in that business? So we're not saying that we're going to stop anyone from getting into that crisis point, but we'll do the best that we can to put as many barriers in the way as possible to get them to not get to that point. And it all, again, comes from my dad. We didn't know that he was struggling until it was too late. As I say, the day that we knew he was struggling, 6 days later, he attempted suicide. But that's not a man that's had a bad day. That's a man who's been dealing with that for a very long time. I look at my own experience. The day that I went to therapy was the day I was in a mess. I was a mess. It was years and years in the making, but I was in a mess. So I think naturally we are very reactive as individuals. We've always been told to wait until an issue happens. It's a great saying that says we all believe we're unbreakable until the day that we break. But again, I think it's about educating people to understand that being proactive is important, but also businesses can do better to be proactive as well.
No, yeah, I agree. And I think there's a lot about prevention. You know, we're at a time when the NHS is becoming overwhelmed and waiting lists are becoming overwhelmed. Surely there's a case and a responsibility potentially for employers to create these spaces as a preventative measure rather than that reactive box ticking we mentioned earlier. Almost it's a policy in the document, but it means nothing. It's just something we do because we have to, almost. Whereas those employers, and you've mentioned a few that you work with, you know, feel free to give them a shout out again. What are they? Why have they proactively chosen to do something about it? What are they seeing that others aren't, do you think?
Yeah, I think the organizations we work with and we partner with, again, we do a lot of one-off stuff. So we might do a workshop or we might do a talk or something like that as a one-off. But our key focus is to partner with organizations minimum term a year. So, you know, those are likes of Wagamama, you know, Co-op, Superdry, and many others. I think firstly, it's the commitment to making that change. You know, the proactive approach is a different one. So they've kind of bought into that proactive approach by partnering with us. But also I think they're looking at, and this is something that we're always thinking about doing, is tailoring it specifically to their organization. So again, you can take the similar approach or, you know, similar concepts, but the way we support Wagamama is massively different to the way that we would support a business that's 100% remote, or there's individuals that are behind a laptop all of the time. Because if you think about Wagamama, one of the key challenges could be, how do you get that support into the restaurants, right? Those individuals might not have access to emails. So it's looking at the different ways of us doing that. So with Wagamama, you know, we provide our app to all of their employees. We're working with their Champions of Mental Health First Aider network to really try and encourage that across the restaurants. Again, we're doing a series of webinars, but again, it's always tailoring our approach to that business and that industry. So I think, yeah, firstly, it's the commitment to that proactive approach, but then it's the passionate people in the business that then saying, hey, Everymind, we want you guys to think of, you know, another idea how we can better engage employees here. So that's the key thing for us. I mean, if an organization doesn't have that passionate person in the business, that's where potentially they might struggle with engagement. But yeah, it's that combination of someone in the business or a few people in the business wanting to make that change. And they do exist. It's just encouraging them. And then our support is almost like an extension to that team is where we focus.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit about wellbeing strategies soon, because I know that's something you champion and try and build out with employers. But before we get onto there, as a bit of a sort of segue into it, I saw you post a video online the other day, and I've added it in as a question here because I think it's something that people might need a little bit of clarity and understanding to help break stigmas down. Is what's the difference between mental health and mental illness?
Good question. So the difference between mental health and mental illness is a diagnosable condition, whereas mental health is something that we all have, right? So one of the key challenges that I had when I first started talking about mental health was I associated mental health with mental illness. So in other words, if I was to say, let's talk about mental health, I would default to, okay, we're going to be talking about mental illness here. Now, my perception of their mental illness was very negative, straitjackets, padded cells, all stuff that I would see in the movies. So that became very difficult for me to associate with. So if you think about it, if we're working with a construction company like Waits, who we work with, sometimes just even using the word mental health puts people off because they have this, they have this association of, oh, I don't want to talk about that today. I've only come to work. I don't want to be talking about that. So we have to get that difference to be understood better. So mental illness is a diagnosable condition. It's something that an individual has been diagnosed with. Mental health is something that everyone has. Same way as we all have physical health, we all have mental health. Every human being has it, and it's emotions, it's how we feel, it's those personal experiences as me and you have shared here today. Now, again, if you look at it, there's definitely like a scale. In other words, we all have mental health. Can it lead to mental ill health if we don't do anything about it? You know, again, research has shown that yes, it can. That can happen. In the same way that if we are proactive, can we become more mentally healthy and resilient? Again, you know, yes, we can. So I think it's people understanding that and just having more normalized conversations around mental health without us naturally thinking that we're talking about mental illness all the time.
Yeah. Do you, because I've seen similar with some of the organizations we've worked with before, but how do you say mental health without saying mental health to the construction team? What do you use to get them engaged with it? Because it might be something that they feel like, oh, I'm dragged here, I need to man up and just go. Whereas in reality, the content of what you're sharing is probably very important, but overcoming that barrier is the most important hurdle. I was curious, is there anything obvious that you do to talk to these organizations without using the word mental health?
Yeah, it's a couple of ways. I'll give you a couple of tricks. So there's a great charity called 𝐂𝐎𝐎. If you had a 𝐂𝐎𝐎 campaign against living miserably, they're focused on male suicide. They do it very, very well. So what we try and do in those situations is let's embed conversations of mental health without it being obvious. So in other words, one of the ways in which we can engage people on a construction site could be every Tuesday, they do a Tuesday Toolbox talk. Tuesday Toolbox is basically just, you know, site managers updating the team and like, here's what we're going to be doing, etc. Can we embed some form of mental health conversation in that Tuesday Toolbox? You've already got the engagement. So now I'm just in creating that kind of conversation as part of that. Another thing that we tend to find works really well, especially with men, is almost like physical health challenges, like less daunting, a little bit more kind of competitive. So we might do like a walk-in challenge or who can get the most steps or something like that, that encourages more people to sign up to that and they want to engage in that. Now, again, what we do is if we're saying like, okay, we're going to be doing this, once we've got their attention, then we could talk about potential benefits of mental health and why it's important to talk openly about mental health as men. And you can start to embed some of those conversations in that way as well. So I think those are the main ones, but also just choice of language. So we find that men react and respond better to words like resilience. Let's talk about resilience. What we're saying is let's talk about our feelings, right? And
No.
how we can manage them better. But it just seems a bit more, let's talk about resilience, right? It seems a bit more less
stronger word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's less intimidating. So I think language is really important. And then equally, as I've shared, how you can embed conversations of mental health in day-to-day stuff that the individuals do as well.
Yeah, there was a project that I heard of recently, you might know it as well, called Head in the Game, where they get a group of blokes together and go and play football.
Exactly.
But before that, they create a space to have a chat about anything. Yeah. It sounds like such a great initiative. And I think you're right. It's like, rather than creating this dedicated, this is a mental health session, we're going to do this, but we're also going to do that and embed it in it. I think that's a great.
Exactly. It's so important on how we can. I've thought about this for years. Like, if we want to reduce stigma, if we want to create more awareness, we have to start to think about ways we embed conversations of mental health in day-to-day life. So I've always had the idea of a coffee shop, and I've just seen Jack, who is a 𝐂𝐴Q.com, started by Danny Gray, is a guy who started War Paint. It's the makeup for men. Incredible guy with an incredible story. Did an incredible pitch on Dragon's Den about his own experiences of mental health challenges. And he just launched a coffee shop, Jack, which is like a mental health coffee shop. I saw a guy in Australia launch a pub that was for encouraging conversations of mental health. I remember Time to Talk, they did these bar mats, so the beer mats, and on the beer mats, and they shared them with lots of pubs across the UK. On these beer mats, it was like, reach out to your mate, or don't be afraid to talk, and it had the time to change details on the back. And then you see in like football, and how now football are implementing mental health conversations. The fashion industry, how are they implementing mental health conversations? Like, is there clothing brands? I know there is some that can encourage conversations of mental health as well. So yes, so much of that I think so important. And the reason why I say this, and no disrespect, when I first started to share my story, I got invited to speak and facilitate a lot of mental health events. And what became very clear very quickly is the audience was the same. These were individuals that were open to come to a mental health event, but get someone who wasn't really at that point in their life to attend a mental health event, never happening. Like, they're not going to come and spend a whole day at a mental health event, but can you get them to attend something different and then embed that conversation in, which I think is something that we need to do better as well still.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fascinating conversation that really normalizes the topics, and I guess that forms part of what is a well-being strategy. That was sort of one of my questions I wanted to ask you. It's for employers listening, for employees listening, what is a well-being strategy, and should every business of every size have one?
Yeah, I think every business should have one. It's the same as having a strategy for a business in regards to growth, right? It's like, what are we doing as our strategy to improve the well-being of our employees, improve the culture, improve everything that we're trying to do. But there's so much that can go into a well-being strategy. But one thing that we talk about a lot is there's a simple change that any business can make to make their well-being strategy stronger. And this is a simple change that I've seen happen for so long. Like, it's focusing on the why and not the what. So what I mean by that is, if I was to go to a HR professional or someone in a business and said, what are you doing for mental health of your employees? They would reel off stuff. We did this, we did that, we did this, we've got some free fruit, we've got a slide in the office, and I literally would just reel off lots of stuff. And then if I was to then follow that up and say, why are you doing all of that? That's when, not always, but sometimes they would struggle. There was no real kind of reasoning behind doing it. And also then when I started to read articles about employers doing well for mental health and well-being, the articles would just reel off the stuff that they were doing. So what we mean by focusing on the why and not the what is start with the why. why are you doing this? What's the key objective, or what's a few key objectives? And then the what follows, the initiatives that you implement follow. So I'll give you a good example. If one of your whys is, we want employees to feel more comfortable to talk to managers about their mental health, then the what becomes easier to answer. It's like, okay, we need to obviously equip our managers. So we need to look at training for them. We need to think about ongoing support for our managers. We then need to look at, okay, how do we encourage teams to talk openly to their managers? So then the initiatives make more sense. You know, a slide in the office isn't going to help. You know, free fruit in the office isn't going to help people talk to their managers. So it's starting with the why, and it can be as simple as that. It could just start with, we want to help employees feel more comfortable to talk about their mental health. That's the why. That's the start of the strategy, and then the what follows. And yeah, getting people on board with that strategy, getting buy-in. There's so many other elements to it, but I think that's a simple change that anyone listening to this can make.
And it is almost following business principles. It's a business strategy, isn't it? It's I'm sure you're familiar with the start with why, the Simon Sinek talk. It applies to this process as well, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, what prevents companies doing it though? Is it a leadership issue, do you think? Is it a culture at the top where it wasn't like this in my day, get on with it sort of? Is that, do you hear that sort of thing? Why are people rejecting it as a concept, or not engaging with it, do you think?
Yeah, I believe there's a lot of moving parts. You know, I believe, you know, we talk to HR professionals all the time. You know, mental health will normally sit on the shoulders of HR. And what we tend to see is they tend to firstly struggle with time. You know, HR are being tasked with lots of stuff, and mental health is just one part of that. So they tend to be struggling with time, which means the time that they're trying to put into all of this stuff, they don't have. And a lot of the people that I speak to are really empathetic, meaningful individuals that want to do so much more for their people, because in HR they see it, but they don't have the time, and then they don't have the resources because maybe they haven't got that exec buy-in, they haven't been given the budget, etc. So I think we did a session on it this month. You know, educating HR professionals or the people team or anyone who's has this sitting on their shoulders to be able to sell it into the leadership better is going to be a huge benefit, because the way that you almost have to pitch it to them is a way that even I feel uncomfortable pitching it to them. It's like very much about, you know, what's the return on investment? How are we going to track this? Like, what's the ways of us measuring it? But if we can get more individuals to be able to do that, then that can open up more resource for them to then be able to provide that adequate support. So I think, yes, buy-in is very difficult. I also believe that there is still a lot of apprehensions around this. It's like, are people going to use it to their advantage? You know, people have always used physical health to their advantage, right? I'm sure we've all phoned in sick to work and given a different reason, right? Because maybe we had one too many the night before. But yeah, there's lots of different moving parts. But I would say that getting that buy-in from the top is probably the most challenging part.
Yeah, it's and I guess over time those barriers will break as leadership changes. That will break. In theory, the tide won't change. It's just a slow-moving current in certain industries, I'd assume. Not ignoring the small businesses or employees at an individual level. What does what could an individual's mental health, well-being strategy look like? What can a person take ownership of? For example, mental health first aid. Is that something that you'd advocate that everyone should be aware of? What can an individual do if someone's listening to this thinking, my leadership isn't, but I'm going to look after me, my own well-being strategy? What might that look like?
It's a really good question, because I believe, as you just highlighted there, it's like we talk about this a lot. If you haven't got senior leadership buy-in, if you haven't got your organization doing much, don't feel like you can't get that support yourself, right? So I think from an individual point of view, there has to come some ownership and some responsibility of that person. And again, I think if you're waiting for your organization or you're waiting for other people to do more for mental health and well-being, then, you know, you're almost trying to control something that you can't control. So from an ownership point of view, as personal point of view, I think diving deeper into educating yourself on mental health and mental illness. You know, I'm not perfect. You know, as I've said before, my understanding of depression when my dad had it was massively different to what it is now. I'm open to admitting this, but when my dad was diagnosed with depression, my natural reaction was, what have you got to be depressed about?
Yeah.
Right. So because and it sounds horrible, but back then I was only taught that depression was, you got your head in your hand, you're always sad, you don't leave the house, and if you've got a good job, etc., then you can't be depressed. Right. So but now that's different. Like now I would never say that to anyone because I've experienced it. I get it. I obviously lost my dad. So I would never see it in that way. So I think everyone can educate themselves more on it. As we said about OCD earlier, very misunderstood. So whether you're hearing people's stories, whether you're just, researching it, whether you're, looking up, some important documents in regards to what these different types of mental illnesses are, I think the more education, the better, because we haven't been given it. But then also I think it's just from an individual point of view, what can you do today to be 1% better? Like, what are you proactively going to do? I'm very focused on my mental health, and I still have to remind myself all the time to do it. But I'm always thinking about how can I focus on my mental health to be a better dad, to be a better husband, to be, a better leader, all of this stuff. So I think, again, with that, if you're in an organization and you aren't getting that support, it's still taking some ownership and saying, okay, what can I do today? Even if it's for like 5 minutes, what can I do today to try and get that support? So those are really important. The other thing that I would say, and it's probably a little bit controversial, but there are so many opportunities that are now being made available that will look after your mental health better. It's becoming a lot more of employers are really having to look at it in regards to like their value proposition to their employees, especially the younger generation. I hear this a lot. The younger generation that are coming into the workplace, they expect this stuff. They expect it. They're not gonna deal with you not giving them that support. They'll be gone. They'll go and find another role. They'll go and find another job somewhere else. So I think it's that as well. If you're in a role and you're not feeling valued, you're not feeling empowered, I think there are so many incredible opportunities out there now that it's really hard to change, but there are a lot of businesses that are providing a lot more support as well.
Yeah, and I see that sort of sea change across various things, but yeah, as a younger culture in terms of the Gen Zs, I'm a millennial, I'm sure you probably are, but the Gen Zs behind, they're more value led, allegedly, and I think if it's not going to be financial reward, look after me if you want loyalty, because it's going to be a buyer's market in terms of the job market, I think, and I think best talent is going to have to get looked after. I think industry can't help but keep up in that respect. I was going to ask Paul, as we start to wrap up here, I've made a note of just like instant takeaways. I was going to sort of just circle back to that individual side of things. For those struggling, because what you say is perfectly fine in terms of what can you do to be 1% better? How can you take 30 minutes to develop? For someone really not sure where to start with that, I don't know what that means. Where can they look? What can people either do in their lives, introduce to their lives, or what can they start to read or watch that you'd recommend is a good starting place?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of therapy. And I think with therapy, it's looking at it in regards to finding the right therapist and the right practice for you. Really rubbish analogy, but therapy is like dating. So, I'll be honest, the first therapist that I went to straight after my dad was through the NHS, and I went once, didn't go back. Second therapist I went to was a private psychologist, went once, didn't go back. And then thought, therapy is not for me, I'm never going to go again. So when I got advised to go and see Anne, I was like, no, therapy doesn't work. So I was very like anti-therapy, but it did. And I think looking back at that, it was because Anne was an individual that I felt comfortable to talk to. And the way that she approached it was very different to the other two. So what I mean by that is with therapy, I think if you've tried it and it hasn't worked, don't write it off. You've got so many different practices. You've got NLP, you've got, holistic therapy, you've got different types of, experiences that these counselors or psychologists will obviously lean in towards. So try different ones. A good therapist will know that you might come once and twice and might not come back. That's okay. Like, as long as you're trying and you're trying to find that right person. And when you do find that right person, like I did with Anne, like just keep going. I see it as personal training for the mind. Just keep going, because it's important to keep maintaining, good mental health. So therapy is the big recommendation that I would give, just because it allows you to be more self-reflective, and it allows you to dive into a lot of the deeper stuff that going for a walk doesn't do. You know, in other words, shame and, you know, past experiences and potential traumas that we've all had to manage. You know, it allows you to reflect, it allows you to have that person to talk about it to, and then you come away and you can start to work on that a lot more. So yeah, I think it's a long process, it's a long journey, and starting therapy is the hardest part. But once you find that right person, stick at it, because I think there's always so much learning and self-discovery that we all have to go through. You know, I'm still learning so much about me and stuff that I still haven't been able to deal with my dad, and other stuff that I haven't been able to deal with. But I definitely use therapy as that kind of go-to for that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what I'm learning about myself and the journey of business and being a dad, and, you know, also figuring me out, is it's never complete. And I think if we look for perfect, it doesn't exist. But I think what we try and advocate is look for good enough. What's good enough? And then what's a bit more on that and a bit more on that. And I think as I evolve into that, it's things that start emerging that I then embrace and capture more of. So it's it's a brilliant sort of wrap, I think, on a conversation today. I just want to say thanks for being so open. You know, I think sharing like that is only helpful to those listening, to the employees you work with, and I can see why, you know, the business that you've got is growing so nicely. It's a pleasure to chat with you. I mean, Paul, how can those listening connect, read more, engage with your content? Where can we find more about you, bud?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on socials. If you search for Paul McGregor on LinkedIn or Instagram, you should be able to find me. You can also go to everymindatwork.com and you'll be able to find out a little bit more about Everymind. There's a bit on there about the story and how the business started and the team. So that's the other place that I would recommend people go to. Good
stuff. Paul, brilliant chatting to you, mate. Thank you very much for sharing. We'll be in touch again soon, but yeah, let's stay connected. Keep up the good work, and we'll chat again soon.
All good. Thanks so much. Cheers, Rob.
Cheers, Paul.